Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Royce Epler. I am the Chief People and Culture Officer for American Public Media Group, and I am so pleased to be here with you today. I just want to start with a moment of housekeeping and ask if you have not done so to please silence your phones. This session is being recorded, and so we're hoping that we can make this a good session for everyone. So, as part of my role at NPR, I also lead our Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Access initiatives, which we call here IDA. I can only assume that you're here today because you're familiar with Early Risers, the podcast from Little Moments Count, produced by NPR and hosted by Diane Halsey, about how we talk to young children about race and racism. For me, Early Risers really exemplifies our value of IDA and our work here at NPR. Creating content that supports parents, caregivers, and educators in talking to children about race and race differences that centers the voice of our most cherished little ones in the community. It challenges listeners to reflect on our ability to talk about complex topics, even with our youngest children, and creating a future where we can work together on the changes that we want to see in the world. While the Early Riser podcast continues to be at the heart of this work, the reach of Early Risers has expanded well beyond the 5 seasons and 33 episodes we've released to date. Early Risers has evolved into a racial equity initiative, Little Moments Count, a point of pride for us here at NPR, Minnesota Public Radio. In addition to the meaningful conversations that are shared in our podcast, each episode has a discussion guide to help listeners dig deeper into this important topic. A robust social media offering provides video, audio, short format content that reaches busy parents and caregivers with information they can use. Nationally distributed audio hours bring special programming from Early Risers to audiences across the country. The monthly Early Risers newsletter provides curated content and resources designed to help parents and caregivers understand how young children learn about race. Inside are stories, tips, suggestions for having better conversations about race and differences with our little ones. Live events like today bring together community to really engage in conversation about why it's important to talk about race with young children and how to help make this work come to life within our communities. I was asked to share a story from my childhood today as well. And as I was driving home from an evening with Dr. Toni, I had an amazing opportunity to chat with my mom about it. So I grew up in a very affirming community and home. 21 aunts and uncles, so a very large family, what feels like 100 first cousins, and we nicknamed ourselves the United Nation because we have Scottish and Japanese and Black and everything in between within our family, and it's represented in these 100 first cousins. So I was sharing some of the conversation from Dr. Toni's workshop last night with my mom, and she reminded me of this United Nations comment. And she said, as young girls, all the girls, none of the boys did this, we all got together in a line from lightest to darkest. She had no idea why we lined ourselves up this way. But the conversation that she said we were having about it was the beauty of our differences in our skin tone. So we were looking at each other and going next to each other like, ooh, you have this, ooh, you have that. I am certain that some of my cousins were saying, ooh, I wish I was lighter, or ooh, I wish I was this, or I had this different hair texture as well. But what my mother shared with me, and my father as well, so I can't forget him, but it's always the mom, what she shared with me was the importance for her of making sure that we loved our whole selves, from my height to being crazy skinny, to my skin color, to my hair texture, everything that is about me. She wanted to equip me to head into the world with love for myself. So I grew up in an affirming and very privileged environment. I just want to fast forward us to 10 years. I'm not a child, of course, anymore. And I'm shopping with my mother in a department store and we're purchasing makeup for her. Salesperson matches her color perfectly, which you know can be difficult. And she looks at us and she says, No, that's not my color. I would like it to be a shade lighter or two. So I asked her, why? Again, I grew up in this beautiful, affirming environment. And she said, I don't want to be that dark. I want to be beautiful. That's why this work is so important. Even though my parents gave me the gift of loving who I am, they did not also have that opportunity, and focusing on really young children and the importance of this topic is why we're here today. So, before we dive into today's presentation, I'd like to take a moment and thank our very important sponsors. We're very pleased to have the support of Start Early Funders Coalition in making today's event happen. I know that some of the leaders are in the audience today. If you would please stand and give us a little wave. Let's thank them. I looked at the wrong spot. Thank you for your leadership and support of early childhood initiatives across the state. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our friends at Health Partners, who have worked with the underwriting team and NPR to sponsor Early Riser podcast in each of its 5 seasons. Health Partners recently signed on to sponsor 6 of the Early Risers, which is now in production and will be released mid-September. Can we please take a moment to thank our health partners? So in a few moments, you will hear from Dr. Toni. But first, I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Andre Dukes. Please join me in welcoming Andre to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Minnesota. Are you excited to be here today? So my name is Andre Dukes. I am the Vice President of Family and Community Impact at the Northside Achievement Zone, where we are really working hard to ensure that every child of color is college and career ready upon graduating high school. And we take that work serious. It is place-based work, and we just believe that every child, regardless of socioeconomic status and background, can and will go on to college and career success if they have the support of community members, of parents, educators, and all caring adults. And so it is my pleasure to be here today to participate in this very important conversation. I just want to thank Minneapolis Public Radio Station for hosting us today, and just, thank all of you for being here today. I've also been a member of Little Moments Count, the Community Leaders Council, where I have had the privilege of supporting the messages that the first 1,000 days of a child's life are critically important, and that we can wire children's brains. I mean, literally, we can wire children's brains for success simply by talking, reading, singing, and playing with our children. And so I'm proud to have been the first guest on the Early Risers podcast, and I just want to acknowledge Diane Halsey, who is a colleague and a friend of mine, and I'm just extremely honored that she invited me to participate in this event to hear from and have conversations with our esteemed guest, Dr. Toni Sturdivant. And so welcome, Dr. Toni, to the land of 10,000 lakes, and as of yesterday, a governor who is now the presumptive vice presidential candidate for the United States of America. We couldn't be more excited for him and for his family and for our state. And we just want to also acknowledge all of the educators, the caregivers, and the concerned community members that are in the room today. Give yourselves a nice hand today for being here. So Minnesota has some of the worst racial disparities in the nation, and I'm honored to work with many of you who are in the room today to work on these issues and these gaps that we continue to experience as it relates to race and, our youngest children in our state. Our guest is an expert in helping children develop positive racial identities. Her expertise comes from academia, but also her time as a preschool teacher, nonprofit leader, consultant, and most importantly, a parent. Her special interests and what she will talk about today is how we can create environments for our youngest learners that celebrate diversity and promote positive self-esteem. She's been looking into this since graduate school at the University of Texas. In fact, her PhD dissertation was called An Exploration of Racial Discourse Found in the Play of Black Preschool Girls. She found that racial bias starts early. Even preschoolers may think white is better. So the need to do better for our kids and our society is urgent. Dr. Toni is one of the leading thinkers and activists on how we can actually get it done. Her formal title is Director of Early Learning and Head Start at the Mid-America Regional Council, which is based in Kansas City and covers 9 counties, and get this, more than 100 cities in Missouri and Kansas. But that is just one of the hats she wears. We are lucky to have her here today. After we hear her presentation, I'll follow up with a few questions, and then we'll open it up to hear from you. So would you do me a favor, and let's welcome Dr. Toni Sturdivant.
Thank you. I am happy to be here, and I am feeling very energetic with that wonderful introduction, and a little sad about the story about your mother. I wasn't quite prepared for that, but it's definitely on topic here. So good morning, everyone. As Andre said, I'm Dr. Toni Sturdivant, and I always like to start my talks with a little bit of information about myself. Once my mother came to one of my presentations and said, "You never told them who you are. They don't know why they should listen to you. So let me tell you who I am in my own words. I am a career-long early educator. I started my career in education working as a Head Start instructional assistant while I was working on my master's degree in early childhood and elementary education with a specialization in child development. Upon graduating with my master's degree, I became the teacher of record at that same Head Start center that I worked in as an assistant in an inner city school in San Antonio, Texas. From there, I became a master teacher where I led a model classroom with large observation windows where people from all around would come and watch us teach and interact with the children. From there, I left the classroom and began coaching teachers and creating trainings for early childhood and elementary educators in about 15 different school districts in South Texas. During this time, I decided to earn a PhD in interdisciplinary learning and teaching with a cognate in early childhood education. My dissertation, as you heard, Developing While Black, which was a play on driving while black. I thought that was pretty clever. An exploration of racial discourse found in a play of Black preschool girls was the catalyst for my writing, which has been published in numerous scholarly journals. I worked in higher education as a professor, and now I'm in the nonprofit space as an executive for an early childhood education department. So that's who I am. Let's get into what I'm here to say. I'm also a wife and a mother of 2 living children. When my oldest daughter was born, my husband was in college, an undergraduate. So she qualified for preschool at the local university center. We were fortunate that she and eventually her sister were able to spend some of their first years in that environment. The center was quite diverse because all of the children were either the children of faculty or children of students at the university. Apart from the diversity of the children and the staff, the school really emphasized making sure that all children felt they belonged and had a place to be their authentic selves while learning. One day after school, my daughter asked me to style her hair with braids and beads at the end. I figured she had seen one of the other little black girls with beads and wanted her hair styled that way. Even though it was a pretty typical black girl hairstyle to wear braids and beads, it wasn't one that I had ever done for her. I was excited, though, that she expressed interest in such a culturally specific hairstyle. I mean, it was amazing. So I went to the store and got some beads that day. After that, every time after she got her hair done, she would FaceTime a grandparent, swinging her hair, making the beads clink and clank. She was enamored with herself and her culture. I mentioned it to her teacher one day in passing, and her teacher, a white woman, and you'll see why this is important, told me that she had read a book to the class called I Love My Hair, which features a young black girl and tells all the reasons why she loves her hair. There's the book if you're not familiar. She said that after reading the book during center time, she invited children to try to braid and install beads on it. My daughter hadn't requested beads because she had seen another little black girl wear them. She had requested beads because her white teacher used a book that centered a little girl like her to teach. Even the desire to shake her head and make noise with the beads was inspired by the protagonist, Kiana. The author, Natasha Tarpley, allows Kiana to explain the joy of beads through this passage. In the morning, before we walk to the store, Mama adds colorful beads to the ends of my braids. The beads click to the rhythm of my walk, helping me remember what we're going to buy. Tap, tap, clicky, clacky, milk, bread, peanut butter. There's also a syllable lesson in there too, but that's another talk for a different day. My daughter's teacher planned a lesson to affirm her, and it worked. We enjoyed our time at that school, but there was a limit on how long a family could stay for equity reasons. And my husband did get an undergraduate degree and 2 master's degrees, so it made sense that we had to leave. So by the time it was time for my youngest daughter to move into a new classroom, despite him still working as a student on his graduate degrees, we had to move on. We reluctantly said our goodbyes, and I enrolled my children in another preschool. The school was absolutely gorgeous. It was on acres of land. It was lush and green. Deer would sometimes just run by. The curriculum was rigorous, but still play-based. The student body wasn't very diverse, but I figured I had nothing to worry about. My children knew who they were, and they liked themselves until one didn't. One day, my child came home and told me she didn't like her dark skin. I told her I liked it, and she told me I could have it. She also said she wished she had blue eyes. One day at drop-off, when we were about to pull up to the school, I told her I loved her beautiful brown eyes. But she said nothing, just looked out the car window at her school campus. I'll never forget the way she looked, so young, still in a car seat, but so incredibly sad, as she looked at what most people would see as a beautiful campus. That wasn't the only indication that something was wrong. In her play, she started to pretend to be white. When I saw her pretending to have flowing hair, I mentioned that her hair grows out and up. And she said, "I'm pretending to be white." In my article, Are the Kids All Right? A Black Mother's Microethnography and How It Can Inform Early Childhood Educational Practices, I explored my daughter's play themes, so I still have the exact quotes. So I wrote the following. They were using their hooded towels and pretending that it was their hair as they walked into the other room to get dressed. Mama, me, wait, so now the towel is your hair? Ngozi, a pseudonym. Yeah, Mama. But I'm noticing that the hair is hanging down and is not growing out like African hair. Ngozi, we're pretending we're white people. Mama, why are you pretending you're white people? Ngozi, because I love white, beautiful skin. I continue. Moving beyond a love for white skin and long, flowy hair, Ngozi also expressed dislike for herself as she began to get dressed. Mama, do you think your hair is beautiful? Ngozi, yeah, no, not my real hair, but this do, referring to the towel that was still on her head. Mama, why don't you think your real hair is beautiful? Ngozi, because I don't. She was 3. I was hurt and concerned. I talked to her teacher, a person of color, about it and brought in lots of black and brown dolls for the various classrooms, which seemed to only include white dolls before my gracious donation. Unlike her first school, there was no focus on diversity at this school. They believed in a colorblind approach, a just stick with the standards and treat all the kids kindly approach. So while my daughter did as she was supposed to at school, when she came home and she felt the freest, she would share how she really felt. She would show her sadness. This difference between how she presented herself at school and how she behaved at home is important to consider. When I speak of the harm of colorblind, quotes, practices, because we all see color, it can be easy to dismiss it as hyperbole when I say it's harmful, because educators may not be privy to the real feelings that children have about themselves. A smiling child is not necessarily a confident child, and a seemingly confident child is not necessarily a child who loves and embraces their social identities, like their race or ethnicity. Further, if our home was not a place in which we openly spoke about race and racial differences, my daughter may not have felt comfortable revealing her racial thoughts to me either. As adults, we can create environments in which children feel like they can be their whole and authentic selves, or not. Like the first teacher's power to affirm, this new teacher had power too. She had the power to wipe away all of the confidence my daughter had in herself, fostered by her teachers, parents, and a home that affirmed her. She didn't do this by being mean to her or by being quote unquote racist, but by simply ignoring differences altogether. This abrupt change in my daughter's feelings about herself broke my heart, but it also taught me a lesson that I have made my mission to share with others. Adults have a powerful opportunity to influence the way that children feel about themselves. A powerful opportunity to influence the way children feel about themselves. The Black art, books, television shows, toys, festivals, and other experiences that my husband and I provided for our children were not enough. Our home environment did not change in its celebration of our culture. Only her school environment had changed, but that change profoundly impacted her, and she is not an anomaly. Of course, her teachers at school had no idea that she was struggling with her identity. They saw a child who was eager to play, who performed well on assessments, and had no trouble following the rules. They saw a child who wanted to hug her teacher and waved goodbye with a smile on her face. However, when she was home, when she felt the safest, the smile would disappear as she spoke of her desire to be different. This was interesting to me to see this 180 in my child. Our home environment was affirming before they were born and always continued to be that way. And at the time, I didn't know that schools, that teachers had so much power. This is what led me to my research. Given my daughter's story, coupled with fellow trainers telling me that teachers did not need to be concerned with issues of race and ethnicity, I sought answers through a doctoral degree. I designed a study that took place at a racially diverse preschool. For one semester, I sat in a pre-K classroom and observed the play of 13 four-year-olds. I brought in 4 dolls, 2 black dolls of different skin tones and hair tones, both with kinky afros, a Latina doll with straight brown hair and brown eyes, and a white doll with green eyes and blonde crimped hair. I dressed all the dolls in the same outfit and shoes, gave them all the same bow, and placed them in a basket that included salon props like combs, brushes, afro picks, hair accessories, an old hair straightener with the cord cut. I also included a fake foundation palette with about 10 different shades to choose from, makeup brushes, and child-safe mirrors. But before diving further into my study, let me explain how I arrived at such a design in the first place. Before I even began to conceptualize my work, we as a field already knew that play serves as a primary means of development for young children. That's why early childhood spaces are play-based, and that it provides insight into their development so we can assess knowledge as they play. This is why early education assessment systems include observation and note-taking. We know that we can watch a child playing with blocks and hear them say that the roof will be red like a fire truck, and know that they know the color red. We don't have to quiz them. We also already knew that young children were shown to prefer whiteness, whether it was drawings of white children that were preferred over drawings of black children in the 30s, or white dolls that were preferred over black dolls in the 40s and 50s, or black dolls that somehow couldn't fit on the doll shelf, so were left on the floor, or refusal to play black characters during pretend play, or a desire to make themselves pretty by adopting more Eurocentric features in the 2010s. This pro-white bias with children 4 and under was already well documented in research. There had also been research published that showed that parents' racial socialization practices were positively correlated with positive racial identity development. So when parents did things like had conversations with their young children about race and even racial discrimination, the children in turn tended to have better overall feelings about themselves. This research which I had read before having children, is what made my daughter's situation so baffling to me. But once I learned that researchers have also found that educators and schooling can contribute to racial identity development through curricula adopted or not, as well as through teachers' methods of facilitating learning, it made sense. During my studies leading up to my dissertation, I also found that there's a theory called critical race feminism, which states that not only are women and girls suffering under sexism through structural systems that disproportionately benefit men, like the idea that women must be physically attractive to be deemed worthy or capable, while men can prove their worth through merit, for example. But that also structural racism exists in which Black people are disproportionately found in negative situations and statistics due to social, political, and historical facts that have yet to be rectified. And that if someone is both femme and Black, that they fare worse than either or separately. This theory can be used in legal cases in which a Black woman may be discriminated against for, say, wearing braids. Without critical race feminism, a company could say, we're not racist, we have 3 Black men in executive leadership. And we're not sexist, our CEO is a woman that's white. Critical race feminism lets us see that it's not a this or that, but for some, it's both. This is also intersectionality. Additionally, I learned about phenomenological variant of ecological systems theory, or PVEST, which states that identity formation is a lifelong process that passes through various stages at different points in the lifespan, say early childhood. During these stages, individuals use their own internal beliefs and dispositions and what they are exposed to in their environment to help shape their ultimate identity. So this explains how siblings could arrive at different ideas about their identities, which played out in my own home, where one child was very confident in who she was and the other struggled greatly. After learning about them both and the other knowledge around play and development, I knew what my next steps would be. I adopted critical race feminism and phenomenological variant of ecological systems theory, and determined that I could peek into the racial learning of young children by observing them play. By using dolls, I could tap into their knowledge of beauty standards. I also could learn more about the context in which they were developing by surveying their parents and learning more about the teaching and curriculum practices in their classrooms. So for one semester, I sat in the back of a dramatic play center, observing and documenting the play of the children. In addition, I sent home surveys with some of the children, asking their parents about how they approached race in their homes. Through my observations and reviewing the survey data, I found that, for the most part, the adults in these children's lives, parents and educators alike, were silent about race. Similar to the second preschool my daughters attended, and like my daughter, the play behaviors of the children showed discomfort with Blackness and a bias toward whiteness. The children in the classroom, except for one boy of Nigerian descent, whose mother talked to him about his culture at home, did not like the Black dolls. They showed this in a variety of ways. Firstly, if either of the non-Black dolls were available, they would choose them to play with. They would even choose to leave the area altogether if they looked in the basket and there were only Black dolls available. Tears were shed over who was able to get the non-Black dolls first. And when a child did decide to play with the Black doll, they mistreated them. Whether it was minor things like pulling their heads off, as opposed to the careful way they treated the non-Black dolls, or stepping on them as they walked by, and abandoning them as soon as a non-Black doll became available, to the more severe things like dumping containers full of play food on the Black dolls, to even pretending to cook them on the stove, despite never doing such a thing with one of the non-Black dolls. They just didn't like them. But that's not all. They also showed evidence of their racial learning in more complex ways. For example, there were unwritten rules about which dolls were switchable. If a child had the white or Latina doll and wanted to switch dolls with another child, they almost always would allow the switch. On the other hand, if a child had one of the Black dolls and wanted to switch it for either the white or Latina doll, the other child would not oblige. There was only one time during my observations where a child was able to switch a Black doll for a non-Black doll, and that was on the first day that I brought the dolls in. And when the child that agreed to switch wanted to switch back, the initial holder of the Black doll refused to switch back, causing the other girl to sob and abandon the Black doll. There were other rules as well. During dramatic play, children often wanted to be the mother or the doctor during the play because those roles came with the power of telling other children what to do. At some point, the children started using dolls to buy the coveted roles from the other children. Pretty brilliant. But the dolls that could be used to purchase these roles were only the non-Black dolls. Black dolls could not be used in this way because everyone in the class understood that they were not desirable. Children even used the makeup to pretend to lighten the skin of the Black dolls. Noticing this, I asked the Latina child who was doing it at the time why she was putting the light makeup on the doll, to which she replied, to make her beautiful. In noticing that the children were bringing dolls to the play hair salon to get their hair done, I grabbed one of the Black dolls from the basket that, of course, wasn't being played with, and asked Amber, the Black girl pretending to be the hairstylist at the moment, if she could do my baby's hair. She refused to style the hair of the Black doll, stating that it was too big, despite the doll having hair that looked just like hers. I couldn't even get another child to style a Black girl's hair with me. They just were not desirable. My hair even became a problem. At the time, I wore my naturally kinky hair loose and down, or rather out. It was pretty big most of the time. On numerous occasions, one of the Black girls in particular would ask me when I was going to straighten my hair to make it beautiful. Every day after the initial question, when I came in still wearing my natural texture, she would remind me that I could get it straightened to look like the bone straight hair of the Latina doll. The doll that she and Everly, another Black girl, would use as the example of how they wanted their hair done during salon play. Despite me bringing in a book that showcased page after page of hairstyles for natural Black hair textures, and if you remember, styling tools made for that sort of hair, like Afro picks, for example. The Black girls in the classroom made it clear through their play that their issues were not just with the Black dolls or my hair, but with Blackness within themselves as well. On the day that I introduced the makeup palettes to the classroom as a way to tease out whether the dislike of the Black dolls was solely related to their hair texture or not, all of the kids were very excited. They immediately started trying to find their color match. One of the focused children of the study, a Black girl, who I'm calling Everly, took the palette to her teacher, and our teacher worked with her to find her exact shade. After the conversation, she came back to the Dramatic Play Center and pretended to use the shade titled Caramel, a shade that was way too light for her, and the shade that her Asian classmate, let's call her Julie, had correctly identified as her color match. When I pointed out that the shade she was using was the same shade Julie said matched her skin, Everly said to me, "That's the color I want," emphasizing to me that she was well aware that her skin tone was not that color, but she wished that it was. 4-year-olds. On a separate occasion, the other Black girl in the room, Amber, was pretending to get ready for work. She sat at the child-sized wooden table, holding up a mirror and pretending to apply makeup. She correctly selected her color match and pretended to pat her face with foundation, grabbed a bag and some keys, pushed in her chair, and headed away. As she took a few steps, she stopped, thought something to herself, and without saying one word, sat back down at the table and pretended to apply more makeup. This time, instead of tapping the makeup brush over the color closest to her skin tone, she chose the caramel color, the color of the plastic of the white and Latina dolls, the same color that Everly said that she wanted, and smiled as she pretended to apply the too light shade of makeup. She got up, walked away with a bounce to work. Amber clearly knew what color most closely resembled her skin because she selected it the first time. But she also knew that in play, you can be and do anything. She used that moment to live a brief fantasy of being fair-skinned, just like the non-Black dolls, and just like the characters in the curriculum that the school had chosen. Needless to say, the time I spent working on my dissertation was quite difficult. I couldn't react to or coach the children through their decisions because I would have skewed my study. I observed, took notes, asked clarifying questions, modeled some appropriate behaviors with the Black dolls, and went to my car and cried before driving home each day. It wasn't just my daughter. And it wasn't just the children in this classroom. In fact, anytime a researcher had similar questions, the results were the same. Children, yes, young children, are acutely aware of race, and they understand the value of different races within our society. This would be sad within itself, but it turns out that racial identity development, that is the preferences and feelings around one's own race as it relates to others, has a profound impact on future success. Racial identity is linked to academic achievement, psychological well-being, and educational attainment. With the more positive racial identity you have, the better off you will be in life. Research shows us that feelings about race are mostly solidified by age 8 without a major intervention. I observed these children at 4. They had time to grow and learn about the beauty and about their beauty and brilliance, and I hope that they did. I left Affirming books and another set of dolls in the class for them when I left. I spoke to educators within their community as often as someone would let me talk to them. And hopefully, someone along the way either helped them solidify positive feelings about themselves by the time they turned 8, or someone will be bold enough and affirming enough to disrupt the negative feelings even after they have left the early childhood stage of their lives. I stated that racial views are mostly solidified by age 8. So here's some audience participation. Using your fingers to show the answer you're choosing. At what age do you think we begin to behave in ways that show awareness of race? 1 finger is at birth, 2 at 3 months, 3 at 12 months, 4 at 2 years, or 5 at 5 years. I'm seeing 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s. 1, I see a 1, okay. The answer is 3 months. We know this by showing infants pictures of human faces of different races. While not at birth, but by 3 months, infants begin to prefer to look at faces of the same race as their mother, their caregiver, in the children that were included in the study, which means they have to notice those visible differences. Therefore, from infancy throughout early childhood, we need to affirm children's identities as well as those of others. This is important to remember. Too often, well-meaning adults wait until they believe it is the right time. But the right time is much earlier than many people think. So I spoke about the parents being silent about race. And I want to point out that one of the mothers said that she fully intended to talk to her child about race, but when she was old enough. Because the mother was working on an assumption that I think many hold, is that when they're this little, it doesn't matter because they don't understand. But they do, and they are learning a lot. The question is, what is it that they're learning? My daughter is fine now. We eventually disenrolled our children from the school and homeschooled them until we found a school that celebrated Blackness as part of the curriculum. We worked to undo the harm caused by colorblind curricula and teaching practices. But we never should have had to do so. Of course, my daughter was fine. She has a mother who is an early childhood educator, who taught in a model school, trained early educators in this topic and others, and eventually saw a PhD focusing on this very topic. She is not the typical young child. She was positioned to overcome schooling that never considered her. I had the privilege to be able to change schools, to sell my house, and move to a more diverse area, to provide diverse materials for the school, to find a private, independent Black school, to give her future teachers books, and to train the entire faculty at her elementary school. True story. But my child being fine is not enough. I want every child to walk into any space and leave with confidence and knowledge of how wonderful they and their racial ethnic group members are. Black children and other children of color should be able to enjoy this disposition that white children often feel due to their routinely being centered. My hope is that no young child comes home wanting to give away their dark skin, that no 3-year-old will sit in their car seat looking onto school grounds wishing that their beautiful brown eyes were blue. I want all young children to be able to thrive and feel comfortable in their skin. I want children to be able to look in the mirror and confidently say, I like myself, because they were given the proper support to do so. Even while they are developing in a society that so often tells them to believe differently. I want adults, regardless of the age group or grade levels they teach or their specific roles, to tap into their power and harness it to foster positive racial identity development in the children they serve. Whether you're a neighbor, a teacher, a parent, an aunt, or a community member. The children need you to have the audacity to not only care, but to take action. I wrote I Like Myself after group asked for help in affirming identities. In the book, I provide example activities like using beads and yarn or baby dolls to teach patterning, to using nursery rhyme tunes to sing affirming songs. Let's try this one together. So this is a song that I wrote to the tune of This Old Man. And you can take any tune and make any words that you want to affirm the identities that you want. But let's just take a moment to sing Here's My Skin. Here's my skin, it covers me. I have skin from my face to my knee. We all have skin, it doesn't look the same. Dark skin, light skin, there's no shame. Awesome. And I also walk the reader through steps to create their own experiences for the specific identities they are trying to affirm. So if you are already on a path to affirming racial identity, my goal is that this resource will move you forward. My desire is that your interactions will continue to grow and that each child who learns from you leaves you having developed in a healthy and positive way. If you're not, I hope to get you started.
Children understand the beauty is it is like, and you are a holder of it, and that's important for development. I just appreciate the fact that you really are thinking about like children being able to be authentic, and how you wanted that for your daughter to just be your authentic self. And we talk a lot about that in our social context, but we don't know how to shape it, right? And so I think what you are bringing to the field is how we shape our ability to be authentic in how we show up, how we feel about ourselves. The other thing that really stood out to me in your presentation is just the reaction that the children had to black dolls. And even when, that was the only option and they had to play, there was still this kind of adverse kind of reaction to the black dolls, and in some ways physically harmful, right? And how that speaks to just how they see themselves, right? Can you say more about just that connection between how I view blackness and my response to that as a child?
Yeah, so this is where I think coming from the classroom helped me as a researcher, and that I knew that what the children believed and thought would come out in their play. And so if they had only mistreated the black dolls or chose not to play with them, I still would have been able to say that that came from some internalized beliefs. But fortunately or unfortunately, they also made statements about blackness outside of the dolls, to really drive home the point that it really wasn't about the dolls. It was about society. And they were using play to grapple with something that they were aware of that was happening in society. And children do this in many ways, not just about race. So I think about my children who played funeral after a loved one died. Like that is how they were working through their emotions and feelings about this bad thing that they experienced. And I see that in a very similar way with these children, because even though they mistreated the dolls, I also saw them get sad when negative things were said about them. So they didn't think it was okay that this wasn't liked, but they also could use this space to deal with it.
Right. Yeah. And that's important to have a safe space to be able to grapple with these issues, especially for children who are trying to really understand the world, right? They haven't figured everything out. They don't really understand why, the world is set up the way it is, but they know they have to navigate it in some ways. And some children do better at that than others. And that's why, they need adults to help them navigate those situations in a safe space. And one of the other things that I really appreciate about your research is that it's rooted in your own personal experience, right? As a parent. And, I love to just hear more because, parents have values that they bring to their advocacy with their children, how they show up. And, we often don't pay enough attention to the values that our parents hold. So as you were going through your own personal experience with your daughter and really, seeing how she was reacting to herself, really being creative about, what is, beauty and having long hair, there was a value that you started to feel that lived underneath your response. Say more about that value and where did that come from? How did you gain those values?
Yeah, so it's very important for my husband and I that our children love that they're black, that they understand that their ancestors are from Africa, and that we live a very Afrocentric life. And my parents instilled a love for blackness in me because my mom struggled with her racial identity, and she didn't want that for her child. And it's interesting that you asked me this because just 2 days ago, I was looking through some papers that my mom kept, and she was journaling, and she wrote like I was 3 or something, and she said, Toni is proud that her ancestors came from Africa. So like this was so important to my mom that she wrote this down in her journal, because it was very intentional for her. So it was shocking to me that my child had this issue because, you know, we thought this was a generational curse that had been broken.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, we talk a lot about representation now and how important that is to have books that reflect blackness. And then stories, even the stories. And, as a part of our African American tradition, oral community or oral communication is a part of that history and being able to tell the stories of our ancestors and those kinds of things. And that really helps to reinforce that identity development, right? And do you feel like enough families today are, carrying that oral tradition and telling those stories like your mother did for you?
I think that the oral tradition part of the culture is alive and well. I do think that families should be careful what they say around young children. One of the things that I talk about is that children are always learning, whether you intend to teach them or not. And so I think the way that we talk about things that happened in the past often sometimes perpetuate the same sorts of internalized beliefs about white supremacy or Black inferiority. And even though as adults, we may have moved beyond that. So like I'm thinking about like how people talked about this basketball player's hair, and I can't think of his name, but like he always needed a haircut. And saying this, like, how can he let his hair look like that? Like he should cut his hair. He makes all this money. And like kids hear that and even though it's like a joke, right, for us, for them, it's like, oh, it's something wrong with his hair. And so I think that when we're telling stories and being boisterous and laughing and joking as a part of our culture, we need to pay attention to whose ears are privy to those conversations and make sure we're sending the messages that we want them to.
I was going to start naming some names, but I didn't want to do that because I don't know who's listening. But you're absolutely right. And as we, move to practice, right, we talk a lot about, the work that you are doing as a parent in the home. You had to make the decision to pull your daughter out of a public school system, do home schooling because of this issue. But for the educators that are in the room, are there ways that educators can partner with parents around racial identity development, and what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wished that my daughter's teacher would have asked me how to partner with me so we didn't have to make such a decision. One practice that I liked a lot was a teacher sent home, like books in a backpack is like a common thing, you send home books. But the teacher focused on cultural and racial identities of the children in the classroom. So 1 month, it might be all about African Americans, and they send those books home, and then they kind of like have a book club. And so they sit in circle time, and they talk about the books, and they invite the parents to come in and share their thoughts about the books. The next month, they're highlighting another culture or ethnicity. So I really like that. I like anytime someone is sending a book home with kids.
Right.
Books are so powerful, and there's so many diverse books out there that I think that is a like low-hanging fruit way to involve the parents. I think that educators need to ask parents, how do they show up in the world? Like, what are their daily practices, and what are the things that are important to them, and bring those things into the classroom, bring the parents into the classroom.
Absolutely.
I did a study where a teacher, a grandparent was a jazz musician, and the teacher brought him in from music and movement time, and the kids danced while he played his saxophone. And so just things like that, but you have to know the families and what's important to them to be able to do it.
For sure. In our program, during the pandemic, we started something called Read In events because we couldn't be in space. So we would be outside and we would have people drive in, and then we would sit and we would invite local Black children book authors to read their books. And so that has been so successful. We're still doing it today, but I'm just amazed at the creativity that a lot of those authors would bring. We had mascots, we had people that were videographers that would use videography to illustrate the book, create games to
Awesome.
accompany the books. So there's so many ways that we can do this to affirm. And in your lesson, you had us doing homework last night. Let me just tell you, we were doing, so we were creating lesson plans based on your research. But say a little bit more about, what those lesson plans could look like based on, some of the creativity, bringing in the books and all of those things.
Yes. So, one of the things that I think is the most important for early educators to remember is that you don't have to do affirming lessons separate from everything else. And so, in the lesson planning template that I shared in the workshop, you choose a standard like counting, and then you pick a social identity that you want to center. So ideally, you would have talked to the families, and the social identities of the children in the classroom, and you can represent all of them with frequency. So perhaps I want to affirm Blackness, and I want to do counting, so I read the book Feast for 10, which is about a Black family going grocery shopping, and we count in the book. And we can take that to the house area, and we can count the food in the play center. We can have kids come up and count in the book. We can do these things that are math, early childhood lessons that we do all the time, but instead of just it being about counting, intentionally focusing on affirming social identity of the children in the classroom.
So education can be racially affirming for children
Absolutely.
and culturally affirming for children.
Absolutely.
I think that is so remarkable. I have so many questions, and I do have some prepared questions I probably should ask you. I do have some prepared questions, but so when you're talking to adults about how to celebrate children, is it important to distinguish between race and culture? And then is it important to distinguish between identity and ethnicity? Those are big concepts for adults, but they're even equally bigger for our babies. And so, yeah.
Yes. So I just take, for example, hip hop. Sometimes when, and I always go back to Black children because that's my focus, but all children need to be affirmed. But you could bring hip hop into your classroom, and that can be culturally affirming. But that doesn't do anything about the idea that light skin is better or that hair needs to be straight. It doesn't touch on that at all. Not saying don't bring hip hop into the classroom, because that is, if the children and the families listen to hip hop, then that will be great to bring it in. But that's not enough. So culture and race does need to be separated when we're talking about racial groups that are marginalized. And then the other question you asked was ethnicity and identity. So ethnicity is important too, and it's one of the things that I talk about in the book, because to take Blackness, for example, we're not all the same type of Black, right?
Right.
Like some people are Haitian, some people are Nigerian, I'm from Texas. Like there's all these,
That's a whole nother country. Now, let's get
there's all of these different ways that we show up in the world as a Black person, and that matters too. Religion. I have a section where I'm talking about being Black and being a part of a minority religion, and how that needs to be affirmed too. And so ethnicity, is very important because it can change the way that we show up in the world, and it can be something that is seen as abnormal depending on what that ethnicity is, and separate from the messages about race alone. And I would say that identity encapsulates all of that. So the race, the culture, the ethnicity, the religion, all of that is identity, and all of those individual parts are important to consider.
Yeah, we're not a monolith, and we come in all shapes, sizes, colors, forms, religions, and so in order for us to show up in authentic ways, people have to acknowledge our whole being,
Right.
right? And I think that children often cry out because they want people to see their whole being and not just see our perceptions, our experiences, our biases, and those things that we project upon them. And so I think that, holding the whole child is so critical in terms of shaping that racial identity and the social emotional health of our babies and their ability to be successful both academically and throughout their lives. So do these ideas and suggestions vary depending on who else is in the room? Like, does a white teacher do things differently than a black teacher or a Latinx teacher? If you have a bunch of kids with different backgrounds or a bunch of kids with similar backgrounds, do these ideas vary?
Yeah, so I really like the anti-bias framework that NACI put out with Derman Sparks, anti-bias education for ourselves and young children, where it talked about how children need to like who they are first. So that might what the children in the classroom might make that look different. But the next step is they need to be comfortable with other people's diversity too. So it really doesn't matter whether there's a black child in the classroom. If we know that blackness is seen inferior in the society that this class of nothing but white children are developing in, then it would be harmful for them too if we did not check those messages.
Absolutely.
And so that is also not positive racial identity to develop thinking that your race is superior to all others, right? We are harming those children too.
Right.
And so it doesn't really matter who's in the classroom other than maybe, make sure that you're affirming them. But think about the society that the kids are developing within, and what are those messages that we really need to counter to make sure that they're healthy.
Yeah, so messaging and media brings me to my last question. The Early Risers podcast this season is focused on media, and we've learned that the days when we were told not to let kids on the screens are over, right? We are in the technological age. So do you have advice on how and when media can be used to achieve some of these goals in a positive way?
Yes. So one thing that I say to parents specifically is don't let your kids watch everything. Like sometimes things are just harmful. And as a parent, you have the right and I would say the duty to say that you can't watch this. But also for all adults, sometimes you might want your kid to watch or your class to watch something because it's so popular. But then you have to be able to have the conversations of, I don't know about this. What did you think about that? And so I would say that if you don't feel comfortable critiquing the work, then only show positive messages.
Exactly.
But if you can have a conversation with children at their level about what may have been wrong with something, then you pretty much can show anything, right?
Yes.
Because you can counter the messages. And sometimes the best teachable moments is when something is wrong.
Yes.
So you can show the error in the thinking.
Absolutely. That is so important. Have the conversation because children don't always have the language to communicate what they're feeling, right? And so the more that we can ask those open-ended questions and have them respond, it really helps us to then be an advocate and a support to them as they try to navigate some of these social spaces as they are developing their racial identity. And that all plays so much together, having the conversations, and even for educators, I think having conversations with parents, having conversations with children. I mean, just the whole ideal of communication. As a society, we just have to have this conversation. Like, we have to continue to talk about it, right? And so just the communication is so important, whether it's through media, whether it's through face-to-face, all of the things, right?
Right.
We have to have the conversation. Dr. Toni, it has been my pleasure to meet you and to just hear about your research and to really hear your story. I think just the fact that your research is grounded in your personal experience speaks to the power of it, and you carry it with such power and poise. And so I just appreciate that. I think that there might be questions from the audience, and so we're going to ask Royce to come back.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Dr. Toni. What a gift that was to listen to your chat. So many amazing, wonderful lessons that we shared. But now it's time for all of us to get in on the conversation. So we have Frank and Tia that have some microphones. So we ask that if you have questions about anything that you heard today for Dr. Toni and Andre, just please raise your hand and we'll get to you with some mics. So yes, right here in front.
Hello, Jamie.
Hi. The work that I do right now has been around trauma-informed care and using positive racial identity as a protective factor. And some of the research that we have done over the last 2.5 years has affirmed what we know in Minnesota is that people being early childhood educators and leaders are under-practiced in talking about race and conflict avoidant in really addressing the issue. And so I clearly heard things that children need early on. And when we have underprepared our adults to have those conversations, they could be parents, they could be educators. Do you have any guidance for what we can do for to well equip our early childhood educators, home visitors, parents, and having these conversations? I hear the podcast, but are there recommendations that you have to prepare our workforce for what we really need to do?
The first thing, not to be self-serving, is to buy my book.
Yeah.
Because that's why I wrote it. That is literally the reason why I wrote the book, because I recognize that we don't do a good job. And I feel like I can say this as someone that was in higher ed in a teacher prep program, that we just really don't address this very well. We might have one class on diversity or multiculturalism, and we're covering every single social identity that a human could have, that we're not really spending enough time to really talk about how to handle these situations. So we need to do better, right? That needs to be a part of all of the classes that we have for early childhood. So just in the same way that I'm talking about the practitioners, including social identities in all of the lessons, I think in higher ed, we need to do the same thing. So if the class is about play, we talk about what that looks like in terms of social identities. If the class is about language and literacy, then we're talking about this. So there's work that needs to be done in that space to better equip educators. But I think also establishing communities of practice where people can just talk about these sorts of things with each other. I find that even if I host a workshop and where people have not really thought about these things, they typically can come up with ideas if given the time and space to do so. we had people that were not early educators yesterday coming up with activities that they could do. So I think being intentional about creating that space is helpful. But I agree that because we don't even talk about this as adults, most of us, that is very hard to talk about it with children. And so I think also just telling educators that it's okay if you make a mistake. Like, we're all gonna make mistakes in this work, but it's worse to do nothing, can maybe be that first nudge that they need to try to get something done, and they'll get better over time.
Additional questions? So I'll go here, here, and then here.
Hi, Dr. Toni. My name is Jasmine Vedua. I work at Greater Twin Cities United Way. So awesome to hear your conversation and hear about your research. My question is, with some context, I am a Filipino woman. My partner is a white American, and I have a nephew who is multiracial too. So I plan to have kids. They're gonna be multiracial. I wonder in your research, what has that conversation looked like about affirming identity for multiracial kids?
Yeah, so, and this is something that is addressed, and I like myself, because one of the things that I say is we need to be specific in what we are affirming. It can't be, we're all beautiful, we're all the same, we're all different, because those things don't really mean anything. So knowing that there is obviously some identity work that happens when someone is multiracial or multi-ethnic, even multicultural, then we need to create similar experiences to where we are affirming those identities with specificity. Because it can be very difficult to figure out who you are in a society that is so often making you choose this or that, and that's just not, you're not this or that, you're both. And so we have to acknowledge that and affirm that specifically.
Thank you. Right here in the black and white.
Good morning. My name is Angela, and I just want to thank you for bringing this conversation forward. I work with Andre and some of the others in the room, and my position is it is an adult problem because some of us in our communities are having this conversation. It's just not brought down to this level. And my point being, literally this week, you think about one of the most dominant, most powerful, most innovative gymnasts in the world, Simone Biles. People were talking about her hair as she's winning all these awards, advancing her field, expanding her community of practice. They're talking about her edges in her hair, right? And so it's really more of an American thing, whereas everybody else saw her authentic beauty and her accolades. So I was even online like, wait a minute, this is the wrong focus. So adult-wise, we have these conversations, but they're not proactive and they're not positive. So I just want to thank you for bringing this work forward and making sure we can normalize it, particularly as we advance in the field of early childhood education, as we talk about how do we incorporate parents and society and even people who are non-educators. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
that.
We have a question over here. Frank, sorry. Oh, sorry. Right there? Oh, go for it.
Sorry about that. Thank
And
you
then we'll
so
come to
much
you.
for your work. I have used your study, your doll study, in some trainings that I've done. I'm a social worker by trade. I work in the early childhood field, but I'm primarily working in a pediatric clinic right now, trying to help support those that provide early childhood mental health and thinking about this, how important this is in mental health as well. So. But the last thing I just wanted to point out is just how important like when you said, we talk about social emotional development, we talk about physical development, we talk about cognitive, we've never been trained to talk about identity development across all the arenas that you spoke to. So I really appreciate all the work that you've done. I use your work, I love your work, and I'm so excited to meet you, but I just think it's like we have to be thinking about other disciplines that are impacting and that have the same problems that Angela's talking about, trying to get pediatricians and integrated behavioral health specialists to talk about this subject with the children that they're working with is
Yes,
profound.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is kind of in similar vein to the first question and the last question, but I know many of us in the room are not working in a classroom setting, right? We're parents, we're working in early childhood, or we're supporting early childhood in other professional capacities in the community, outside of the home or in the home. And so I'm wondering maybe which book we should purchase, or what advice you would have for us, how we can support parents, families, and children in other capacities outside of the classroom.
Yeah, so if we're talking about families specifically, I do have a book just for families. And so I would recommend that one. But I think that I like myself, I mean, it's hard to answer the question without knowing the specific roles. But I think the I like myself book is important because it not only gives ideas of lessons and books and things, but it also walks you through how I come up with these things. So it sort of makes my thinking plain. And I think that could be helpful to apply to different ways that we interact with children and families, to see how that might be able to play out. In the way that families or children and families you're interacting with the children and the families. But I do think that is important to for all of us to really think about it, because like I said, children are always learning. So if my child is in play therapy because she's depressed, but all the dolls are white, like that's not helpful. And so it really is all of us. It's not just the classroom situation. She's at the dentist's office, right? And we have the same issues going on. So I think that being able to walk through my thinking to arrive at these situations could be helpful and applied in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Question right there? Yes, thank you, Frank.
Hi, I am really, really thankful for you in this topic. My name is Jolene. I work for the St. Paul Promise neighborhood. I'm actually in the process of writing a book about my experience as a little girl. I grew up in the Rondo neighborhood, and at 4 years old, my family was relocated from the Rondo neighborhood because of the destruction of the community. And we were relocated to an all-white neighborhood. And at 4 years old, I was introduced to racism, right? And so, not knowing, I had never seen white people, I'll be honest, because I grew up in Rondo. And having that experience, I'm 60 years old now. So as I'm writing my book, it conjures up these feelings that I didn't even know that I had suppressed, right? So in my work, I work in an elementary school. And I'm also a grandmother and ama of 11 children. And a few of my grandchildren actually go to the school that I work at. And one of my grandchildren in particular, she has a dark skin like me. And one of the things we dealt with at the school last year, I can't tell you countless times, whereas little girls being attacked because of their dark skin. Now, my school is like 95% African American. So they're being attacked by other African American children because of their dark skin. And in conversations with some of the parents, I'm a family coach. And I noticed that a lot of these children stopped coming to school because of the harassment and the bullying because of their dark skin. And in speaking with some of the parents, I recognized that they were parenting through the pain of growing up as little dark-skinned girls themselves. Mm-hmm. And so not having the tools to work with or nurture their babies at this point. And you mentioned social media. It is like one of the biggest sources of this colorism thing, that we're going into a new school year. And I'm anticipating having the same thing. And I'll be honest with you, I was not sure, even with my own granddaughter. Yes, we have books, and literacy is an issue. You know, getting them the books is not a problem. Getting the reading of the books is an issue. And so I'm already having anxiety about what can I do for these babies that are experiencing this trauma, you know, from the very people that they shouldn't be being traumatized by. And so from a parental perspective, what did you do with your babies?
Everything that I could think of. So school is one context. Like, you can only control what you can control. So I think that it's important to give yourself grace. Like, you are fighting an enormous battle, and you can't hold all that in because it's huge and it takes all of us, which is really the point. But for me, I thought about every single context that I could control for my children. So if we're going to the movies, I'm thinking about the movies. If I'm going to the bookstore, I'm choosing a Black bookstore. I'm thinking about what's there. If I have an aunt that is saying things about good hair and things, maybe we don't go over there very often. Like, I'm literally thinking about every single context. I had difficult conversations with my mom about things that she was letting them watch on TV. Like, difficult conversations that she eventually saw where I was coming from. But I had to choose, like, between respecting my elders and making sure that my kids were healthy. And I was just like, Mom, I'm sorry. I'm not budging on this. My child is struggling with her identity, and I am going to do everything I can to solve this problem. And so we always talked about it. If we're walking down the aisles of a store and the magazine covers look a certain way, we're stopping and we're talking about that. We're stopping movies and we're talking about, like, everything that I could possibly think of as a way to either affirm my child or counter a message that was not affirming. I did it. And it was exhausting. It was a lot of work, and people didn't like it, and I didn't care.
Well, thank you. We have time for one final question. Yes.
I'm sorry, I know you said question, so please don't kick me out.
Not at
It's
all.
just a comment. But I'm Leo Howard. I am the program manager for the 80 by 3 initiative, Resilient from the Start. And I just want to say thank you. My thank you comes from two different areas. Like, I'm sitting here and kind of like, I don't want to say getting emotional, but like, any day now, my little girl's going to be here. And so hearing you talk about just everything today has put me in a space where it's like, lately I just been like on guard. Like, I got to protect her from everything and like got to figure out. And so one, on this side of things, the thank you comes from a space of just hope and just knowing the work that you're doing is just going to continue to grow and develop. And I'm sure it's ever evolving and continuing to grow. But it also caused me to reflect on some of my lived experience and professional experience. Before getting into the early childhood field, I was in the juvenile justice side of things. And I've lost so many people throughout my lived and professional career and life because our young people didn't have a value for themselves. They didn't like themselves. They didn't love themselves. And so without having that value of their own life, it was easy to take someone else's or take their own or really struggle with chemical dependency issues. And so being here today, hearing you talk about how important it is for our young people to have that love for themselves, to be able to look in the mirror and say, I value what I see, is so important. And it's something that I've been really pushing and really passionate about, especially for our young adults who are growing up. And so again, the thank you comes from like my lived and professional just lens. Thank you so much for everything you're doing and the work that you're going to continue to do.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And congratulations.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So,
Tracy, can I make one more
Of
comment?
course you can.
I don't want to leave here without speaking about the role of policy on this issue. And I just want to, give kudos to the state of Minnesota who recently passed the Crown Act, because those are the kinds of policies that allow children to show up as their authentic selves and protects young girls from being discriminated against as a result of how they wear their hair. So
Yes.
the role of policy also is critically important.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. So as we close our time together, I want to once again say a very heartfelt thank you to Dr. Toni for coming to Minnesota and to share all of your research and work and your personal story of your family. It's just been amazing and a gift and a joy to have you here. Thank you, Andre, as well, for being a part of this wonderful day and helping us with the Q&A and moderating, as well as sharing all of the important work that you're doing here in the Minnesota community. So a big round of applause for the two of them. Finally, I also want to thank all of you for spending your time with us today. It's been amazing having you here, listening to this important work, as well as asking all of the great questions. If you're not already a subscriber of the Early Risers podcast and a follower on social media, you can use the QR code that's I missed that. You can use a QR code to access all of our social media channels and the Early Riser podcast collections, where you can also sign up for Early Risers newsletter. We would love to be able to keep in touch with each and every one of you. If you're an educator and you have questions about continuing education credits available for today's presentation, please seek out Heather or Carrie. Heather or Carrie, can you please give a wave? Thank you. They will be able to help get you the information for how you get those credits. Finally, please stop by at the reception desk on the main floor to return your guest badges and, of course, to pick up a parking voucher if you parked at the World Trade Center parking ramp across the street. Thank you once again for giving us your time today. It was really a pleasure to have our guest speaker, Dr. Toni, and all of you here with us today. Thank you.